Did you want to know who the best champion is for every class in OB56? Well then, this video might be for you, as I go through who I think is the best champion for each class in OB56. Now, tier lists are always slightly subjective, and everyone's experience is going to be different. Every level of skill is probably going to be different, and also meta changes and champions change with every patch, and we've got one pretty much every 2 weeks coming out. And a few more champions might be buffed here and there, and they might make their way into the top leagues, but then also the meta might completely change altogether. But in general, this should be a pretty decent list and guide to which champions are decent to pick up this patch. I'll also list a handful of each of the champions. Why? Because this patch this time around is very heavily focused on the ranked mode, and that means that you're never going to be able to always get one champion if you want to pick up. So you might have to pick between two of the frontliners, two damage dealers, if you want to pick somebody out. Actually, in the meta, it seems to be a lot of the picks are two frontliners and two damage, one support, so also makes sense there to mention more than just one champion being best. If you want to let me know who your best champions are for each of the classes, be sure to put them in the comment section below as I go through mine in this video. Anyway, let's just dive in. In the category damage, first up we have Cassie. Cassie has definitely been up there for a few patches now, and after a buff to her projectile speed, her general fire was made much more reliable, and other champions being nerfed saw her being quite a bit stronger, and she's even lived through herself the recent nerf of her dodge roll bonus damage in exaction going from 40 to 30%. However, she has several things keeping her as a damage queen. And to be clear, I put her in here with the legendary card Exaction, which is the one with extra damage on the roll, and the card Incitement, which lets you roll pretty much all the time. So why is Cassie so strong? Well, first of all, she's hyper mobile. She's got near unlimited dodge rolls if you hit every shot, and you keep getting that bonus damage when you're doing those dodge rolls. And that does work very well dancing around a tank, and especially now with the meta being two tanks, you can dance around tanks doing pretty insane damage, but also just generally disrupting other enemies and putting out pretty insane damage as they struggle to hit you. In short, she's as mobile as most flankers, apart from being able to go upwards, and is often referred to as a flex champion, as she can take high damage pot shots from the back line when maybe you are setting up a new push or holding a zoning line, but also you can go full roly-poly into the enemy's back line, cackling and backflipping as you go, and pretty much destroy lots of enemies and to secure some kills. Which is important, as that's where the flankers usually fit in, as you can dive in, get the kills, and dive back out again. She's also just flatly got decent and consistent damage. Her normal fire without bonus is still pretty high, and you can also combo your damage with a blast shot, both reducing an enemy's healing and giving you some more burst potential. Roll shot, blast shot, roll shot, and you'll be killing most of your opponents and stopping them from healing at the start. Her ulti isn't a big team destroying ultimate, but it does counter quite a few enemy visibility abilities and also ultimates. Plus, it can pretty much just help your team be guided into winning a fight, knowing the enemy's movements, or even just a solo duel with you as a Cassie. You know when an enemy's going to come out outside of a wall and get the drop on them. Second up is Leon, and Leon does a lot of what Cassie does, but with hit scan and more ability to spread damage in an area like Drogos. I wouldn't say necessarily one's better than the other at the moment. Leon's also very mobile. Her dodge grace has a 5-second cooldown, which is the same as Cassie's. Now, you can't quite get the instantaneous dodges with Incitement, but with the card Inheritance 4, it gives you 40% cooldown abilities when you get an elimination, and with the Lian, you get those a lot due to your damage spread, especially with Valor hitting all enemies in front of you. It means that you'll be able to combo off your dodging a lot, and the dodge also gives you damage. So she has a lot of strong combo damage potential with a lot of abilities that do damage, and she's arguably slightly easier to use than Cassie, and two of her attacking abilities lock on. She is arguably slightly easier to use than Cassie, and I think if you're newer to the game, it might be easier to pick her up over the Cassie, because with Cassie you have to lead shots, and the rolling and then getting the shot and making sure you get that shot is pretty hard. But her low single shot damage does mean that you have to hit more often and needs a decent aim to pull off her full potential, really. Her damage can also be buffed with the Precision Legendary card, which I think is best. It gives 10% extra damage on your weapon, but the big thing as well here, even if you're missing your shots, if you use your Grace and your Dodge, you will reload instantly, which is really useful to use as a Lian to basically keep the damage really consistent, both in being able to combo all of your abilities off, but then also being able to keep shooting all of the time makes her damage pretty insane and very, very consistent. Leon's ultimate on its own isn't massive, but it can save her in a pinch or can win a duel if you trick another enemy damage dealer or flanker into coming to kill you on low health and then pretty much taking them out. Plus, if you do get a kill, you get charged back, so you'll be likely to have it up pretty damn often as long as you're careful with it. Another plus and why flankers aren't so great this patch is she pretty does much zone them out at the moment, because with the 2 lock-ons, it's very hard to use your mobility there as a flanker to outsmart a Lian and have very consistent damage. Being able to dodge, reload, keep shooting makes it very hard to take her on 1v1 or even get behind her and get the drop on her. Another biggie is she's amazing at applying cauterize, as Valor acts like a weapon shot, the one where it shoots everybody in front of you, thus applying the debuff, and means you can often keep the whole team with reduced healing, and that's a huge bonus for your team. And so for me, those 2 at the moment are the best, although in ranked, often one team will get one or the other. Another thing to consider is they do very similar things between both of them, although Lian does have a bit more consistent damage and a bit more area damage, but they're not always going to work great together. So some close thirds and fourths are first Willow, mainly with a Blast Flower legendary card. She has consistent damage coming from her in-hand, and that's increased with the Blast Flower. Her seedlings work very well against 2 frontliners on a point or deathballing, which seems to be in the meta at the moment. Plus her Dead Zone 2 stops enemies from being able to clump up too much, and that healing nullification could zone out some of the big hitting healing champions this patch, which I'll come down to and talk about. Her ult also can be decent, bombarding points on enemies from directly above, hardly touchable, but it isn't a game winner or anything, just quite annoying to play against. And the thing at the moment which doesn't make her the best is she does have a little bit of trouble against the Lian as a hit scan champion, being able to pick them out quite easily. But both her utility and damage are very strong this patch. Secondly, Drogo's does a very similar thing, although can be good with worm jets depending if the enemies are more mobile and if the map is bigger, and if you want to be a bit more flanky, or combustible if it's quite a tight map and you've got 2 tanks to go against, are likely to be close to each other. And Drogo's, again, like the Willow, has a lot of consistent area damage. His salvo can force an enemy team to scatter and do high damage in its own right, and the same thing with his fire spit. Finally, the big thing Drogos will always have up his sleeve is that his ultimate simply takes one person out of the game with the insta-kill, and that's pretty massive. Finally, with damage, honorable mentions and people I think still worth picking up are Bomb King, and he's basically just the king of stunning people and disruption, but some things seem a bit more wobbly this patch, and generally damage output can be a little bit inconsistent. And finally, Charlene, with his drawn movement speed buff in OB56, is definitely a viable option, and can be much more consistent in doing his damage, and also being able to get away and heal up. And before, you'd have to make the decision, am I going to keep my bow drawn and maybe get a kill, or am I going to let it go and try and run away and heal? Now you don't have to do that so much. The only problem is, Hyro says they fixed his Impaler Arrow, his knockback and stun, but if anything, it seems a bit more unreliable than ever at the moment. I'm finding it really hard to hit those off, whereas before I didn't find it that hard at all, although it was a bit janky before. Moving on to the supports. First of all, we got Genos, and that's the newest champion from OB55, and it's been quite a sleeper hit. People are committing to aggressive builds at the moment, especially in casual matches, but Genos can do a lot of insane amounts of healing, quietly keeping himself to himself, and I've seen over 200k in quite a few matches that weren't even ridiculously long. So when I'm talking about Genos being best, I'm specifically talking about the full heal focused Genos with Celestial Touch and some card investment into Retrograde, reducing the cooldown of Astral Mark, and Light Years increasing the distance. The idea here is with the legendary Celestial Touch, you're able to have some burst with that base 15% heal, and the healing over time the marks just generally provide. With the cooldown, you can keep 2 active marks up most of the time, getting more marks here and there, and basically doing huge healing. It isn't the most fun way to play, but spending most of the game looking at your allies' health bars, keeping behind walls and engaging only when your Astral Mark is on cooldown seems to be working at the moment. Even if somebody does chase you, having an escape all of the time with no cooldown in Astral Wind gives you a good chance to escape any pesky flankers or a flexible damage dealer that comes after you. The one other big thing that Genos brings to the table is his Void Grip. Being able to single out a target for your allies to quickly burst down is a huge bonus to your chances of winning the game if your team does capitalize on it, which hopefully they will do in a ranked game. Finally, if you're between the Astral Marks and Void Grip cooldowns, or an enemy does come after you, your main weapon damage is nothing to be laughed at, which is another plus for Genos. Finally, the ultimate is pretty inconsistent. It's hard to pull off any big sets of kills, but it does a job, and that's making all enemies move out of the way and disrupting them, which can help things out and ruin your enemy's rhythm. So next up is Moldamba. He has a high capability for healing single allies, the AoE healing with his Gourd, and either crowd control or extra healing with his legendary cards, and the extra healing card was buffed. He's also great at singling out and pinning down enemy tanks with his stun, stopping them from keeping up their shields or disengaging, and he can also do that pretty much to all enemies. His ultimate's also huge and can win a point by moving enemies all away from defending, so a real game changer. With the recent projectile buffs, he can also fire spit much more consistent damage between his healing charges, so I think Maldamba, both in his rapid and strong healing plus crowd control capabilities, is a second pickup if you don't get the Genos, and not a far second, as Cauterize does make heals tick for less further into the game, and you'll want something that can have more of an impact, and here you've got a lot of the crowd control. The other big option that's still not on the table is Ceres. She's got a higher single target healing burst than both Maldamba and Genos, and she has quite a lot of potential to escape with her shadow travel, but just generally she doesn't quite have as much crowd control. Her orbs can be annoying for clumped up enemies and tanks, and her ultimate can win a fight if enemy cooldowns are down, but they're not quite as effective as Maldamba's. Plus her heals, though strong, are more prone to getting cauterized highly during those short bursts, and unlike Genos, needing to have line of sight often puts her into the firing line more often when she doesn't want to be there. I wouldn't be unhappy to see any of these three as a main healer though in my team. So with the current meta and seeing what people are picking up, with 2 tanks a lot and 2 supports seems to be a bit shy and less of an optional picked up, but Ying, Grover and Grok all have some strong damage outputs this patch, but can't quite pull off the heals in the games for the whole team, but could work in a support duo combo, having 2 supports, 2 tanks and a damage dealer. So next up, frontliners. Firstly, Fernando is definitely up there this patch. Since his Scorch was buffed and Fireball cooldown dropped, you can keep yourself super speedy firing those fireballs off all of the time. Generally, Fernando can come out and does pretty well at being active with the frontal assaults of your allies, either zoning or flanking, giving more tank to people that are going forwards, whilst being pretty mobile and having some heavy damage. With the quick fireballs, you're also getting Cauterize up a lot of the time, while it actually is a 50% healing reduction. Plus with double tanks, you can let someone else hang back and watch the point if need be. Saying that, his shield is pretty strong at keeping himself alive and protecting allies and being just generally a tank. And finally, his ultimate is a big game changer that can keep your allies up in a pinch, perhaps even long enough to wipe the enemy team. Which is why Fernando's up there for me this patch. Another pick, if Fernando's taken, is Makoa. Now he's been pretty great almost all the time Paladins has been alive, and it's owed a lot to his hook. Being able to pluck an enemy of your choosing over to your allies to burst down is a very big deal. Makoa also was buffed a few patches ago with less drop on his main cannon weapon, making his damage output more consistent, and he's able to do quite a bit of damage at range, which was actually also buffed more recently, reducing the damage drop off. His shield and shell spin can keep himself and his allies alive, and there are 2 solid options of legendaries and a burst on your first shot after hooking, or being able to place down your shield depending on what you're up against. His ultimate too is quite handy and can keep a fight going for longer, and basically makes you super tanky, so definitely a great pickup and an option if that Fernando is gone, or maybe even alongside a Fernando. Nipping at their heels, I feel Ashe can really step up to the mark this patch. Her main attack has been made much more reliable over several patches. She's got a lot of disruption, her shield is quite strong, well, when you place it well, and her ultimate can be very effective as long as she doesn't have too many enemies to go against that have crowd control abilities. But I just feel that she's not quite as good as the Fernando or the Makoa first pickup. Finally, the double tank does seem to be strong at the moment, and a Barrack with tinkering to have consistent damage alongside general tankiness and shield potential can work out in a combo with another tank. Maybe even a Fernando to keep up the aggressive front as you set up and hold objectives and basically bunker down on the point. Another second tank aggressive pickup could be a Ruckus, as they're mobile, they can output a lot of damage, and has been a solid esports pickup for quite a while now, and can do well in combo with another tank. Lastly, flankers with double tanks, which they don't want to go against because they can't burst them down very quickly, and the flexible damage dealers like Cassie, Lian, Drogos with Wormjets, often able to commit and secure the kills. They've been phased out a little bit. Statistically, throughout the history of Paladins, the more flankers you had in your team, exponentially your chances of winning got worse. But we did see the double flank lineup almost win a recent tournament on an older version of the game, so nothing's impossible. But I do feel a lot of the stronger flankers have gotten a heavy hit to their mobility in the past few patches, and has really dragged down the whole class. Out of them all, I'd still say Androxus has the most potential. Even though Darkstalker is gone, he can combo his reversal with an extra 800 damage into an enemy and regain his nether step to have a similar effect to Darkstalker, although there's quite a bit more downtime with the card Power of the Abyss. His ultimate is very strong and can pick out and burst down a single target pretty easily, or maybe even break up a whole point. And especially if the enemy have picked up a Willow or Drogos as second damage, you stand a good chance of disrupting them in the backlines and maybe even putting an end to their damage. And just in general, Androxus does have great burst damage. Eevee may too be able to disrupt the backlines and pick out the healer, but with less backline damage dealer pickups and Willow and Drogos having some dodge, it is harder to see her flourish in the current patch, and she is one of the ones that's had quite a heavy hit to herself. Anyway, those are all the champions I think that are best this patch and are worth picking up. And we've got one more week of this patch, and the next week on Wednesday is most likely the next patch, which will have the new champion Strix, and lots of buffs and nerfs which may nudge champions up or down in the rankings, or maybe even change up the meta completely. But I look forward to it. Who are your favourites? Be sure to let me know in the comment section below. Do you agree with my favourites, or do you have some other suggestions? And who have you been trying out mainly in ranked? If you did like the video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more of my content, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching everybody. Joshino.